Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Appreciate everybody for joining the show on the evening. DeShaun Tate here, as I'm sure that you guys probably already know. And of course, this show is going to look a whole lot uglier on the evening just because of the fact that we don't have Tanisha Batiste on this evening. That being said, I still like to thank, regardless, any and everybody, whether you're watching live and or also following along, following on social media and all the good platforms, wherever you find your favorite podcast and so forth. And even for those who will be around to listen in the future, appreciate you guys for joining me on tonight. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about those Atlanta Hawks, a rematch in the making from opening night, game one, of course, in which I felt really, really confident about this team going into the matchup. Of course, we'll talk about all of that and more, being addressing some of the concerns, the X factors. We're going to get to that right off of the jump ball. And then, of course, a little bit of panic mode that had set in the second half for the Atlanta Hawks. Not before I let everybody know, of course, that this episode of what you're listening to, of course, the Locked On Hawks postcast episode, is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. I just want to jump right on into it because I know, we don't have to do a whole bunch of fluff and trying to, put parsley flakes on the plate and dress this thing up, make it seem all nice. Let's just be real about the reality of what we're looking at here right now. Okay. This is an Atlanta Hawks team that we all pretty much expected. This is just elephant in the room stuff right now. Everybody expected would be this contending team in the East, top four, certainly top six, lock for playoffs. Of course, there's still, plenty of opportunity for them to move forward and go ahead and do so. But certainly wouldn't be feeling, like being in a position of which they have been in the last couple of years and playing them for a play-in spot. All of those things being said, it's just been a real stinker. They've just really been stinking it up. And again, I hate to be this person. I live on the fence of a very fine line that you have to draw between, any given Sunday football term, obviously, but on the basketball side, everybody's professionals, ... Got to bring your A game every night. We all understand that, not overlooking teams, but looking at the name on the front of the jerseys, being the Toronto Raptors, an improved team nonetheless, but yet still in my true heart of hearts feel like it's a team that the Atlanta Hawks shouldn't have the struggles with for the second time in less than 10 games that they have. First one, shame on me for that one, but they're not really in a position in which they can afford to be overlooking anybody right now. And I don't want to hear about they didn't have Trae Young and this and that. Been without Trae Young, got to make adjustments. Injuries happen, move forward. That's just the reality of what it is. Let's talk about some of the concerns that I really believe that this team has, and we'll get into some of the X factors before we cut to a break. The obvious one is the fact that there is no Trae Young on this basketball team, in which so much of this, and I've been preaching this thing for the last, I don't know how many years when it comes to the Atlanta Hawks, got to have that backup point guard. We're not talking about, point guard, putting yourself in position yet again. The guy, by the way, haven't paid yet. The superstar player, the second best thing to ever come through these doors besides Dominique Wilkins. And I'm not confident that you're going to get anybody in free agency, so we could ball that up and throw it in the garbage, in the wastebasket right now. Not putting yourself in position to have insurance on Trae Young and getting a true bona fide veteran of some sort, point guard behind him off the bench to insert plug and play into a starting position if he goes down is just not a smart idea. All of that right there, no question, on the front office. Who is the best backup point guard that we have had outside of, I understand, maybe not a true prototypical point guard, Lou Williams on the team that went to the Eastern Conference Finals. However, Trae has been in this league, 8 years? He's had 2 All-Stars, I believe, on his team, being Kristaps Porzingis, who he has now, and I think DeShaun Tate was one. But that being said, you have to position yourself to, especially if it's a guy you may potentially lose, you're not really seeming to be pushing the needle or pushing the chips to the other side of the table and being in a hurry to pay them. So what do you do in situations like this? You turn around, you don't put yourself in a position. You got backup point guard. Of course, you got Wallace coming off the bench, who's serviceable for as much as he can be serviceable. Nikhil Alexander-Walker, you're doing it by committee. You're doing it, putting guys in position by default. They're out of position. It's putting everybody in a poor position. That should temper and lower some of the expectations a bit, obviously. So that's not good. Kristaps Porzingis, I think, is another one that we have to address, and forgetting about just games as far as tonight, because we can get into the recap stuff. I know that's why we're here, but we just got to address the stuff that's in and out, regardless of what we're talking about after each game that continues to be a consistent issue. Do you try to give someone like a Kristaps Porzingis some time to, kind of get into the system and, bring them in slowly? But that's not the conversation that we're having when we're talking about this team actually competing for a spot in the Eastern Conference. Maybe not to beat the Knicks, maybe not to be the Cavs, but to certainly not someone in position like a Detroit Pistons or something like that to come in, or Philadelphia to come back from the grave. If you're the Atlanta Hawks, you have to be prepared. You finally bring in a center and a Kristaps Porzingis, in which you essentially, it's your first time having a 7-footer probably since Dikembe Mutombo, right? Kind of facetiously speaking. And he's outside shooting jump shots. And I don't think that's putting them in very good positions to win. Certainly putting them out of position to be able to rebound. You got the biggest guy on the floor that's out there shooting threes and chucking them up from very far distances. These are not pick and pop threes. These are just coming down the floor and pulling up like Mark Price. Totally unacceptable. Getting back to it, what did he shoot? 25% from the field, 7'4", mind you, and 14% from three, chucking up threes. I can hear my dad right now all the way in Detroit saying, boy, if you don't get your big butt under the basket. Huge problem for this team. Not a terrible night if you're just looking at the box score, but you really got to go in depth here. Not having Luke Kennard, I think, was a huge issue. Obviously, because he is one of those guys I really feel like is an X factor for this team. Most people would say Jalen Johnson. I think that's the obvious one. We all can pretty much agree upon that. However, when you're talking about guys within the starting lineup, I'm really a believer that Zachary Rissache, who strung together a really good game in his breakout game over the last game or two or so, is really going to have to be someone that's going to step up, especially when you don't have Trey, similar to how he stepped up last year when Jalen Johnson went down. Coming off the bench, I think that guy is certainly Muhammad Gay. And seeing him play on tonight, maybe if you're looking at the box score, you're not going to be overwhelmed. It's not going to pop out off the page at you. But yet still, he is a guy that will chase down rebounds. He's a guy that will chase down his own shot even after a miss. I saw it happen once or twice earlier on tonight. He's going to get down there and do some of the little things, do some of the dirty work, try to be the glue for this team, provide second chance point opportunities, and provide you with some hustle points and things of that nature. Absolutely terrible for the Atlanta Hawks on tonight, who I came into the game saying they needed to utilize their bench a little bit more, try to get some of the fresh leg rotation in there. I know that's really kind of tough to do when you don't have Trey, so you got to pull somebody off the bench there, and then you don't have Luke Kennard, so that's not one of your first guys you can pull off the bench there. And I totally understand all of that, but there's got to be a little bit more contribution. Roster construction, I think, is a big part of all of this. Where they got burned at, I think, in the first game is from a standpoint where they just had difficult matchup issues with the guards from the Toronto Raptors, in which that showed to be the case on tonight, where you have someone like a Emmanuel Quickley, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett. You got to pick those guys up at the half. Perimeter defense, if you're not going to be able to shoot the basketball effectively and efficiently in the second half, you've got to be able to pick guys up at half. These are bull in the china shop type of guards. Guys are just going to put their head down. They only have one gear. That gear is number 5. It's just a 3-headed monster of guys that are not afraid of going in there against a team who has a 7'4" guy that's not standing under the paint. Sure, he had 4 blocks. I would imagine so and hope so for a guy who looks like he could just change light bulbs at the top of the arena. He's so tall. Got to be a little bit more of a defensive presence. Got a feeling they knew exactly what they were getting in that instance. Good night by the Toronto guards. And it probably didn't help a whole lot that you got someone like a Jakob Poeltl who comes into tonight, I think, going to the free throw line 4 or 5 times, came up with a goose egg every single time from the line until he comes into State Farm Arena tonight and can't miss a free throw to save his life. It just appears to clearly be a poor matchup for the Atlanta Hawks, especially when you give Toronto the opportunity to get out and transition. Okay. And they're the best, fast break scoring team in the league at about 20 points a game. The first meeting they had 34. Tonight they had 21. So it appeared that the Atlanta Hawks had slowed them down quite a bit, but most of that was in the first half when they were doing the slowing down. Didn't help a whole lot in the second half by any stretch of the imagination. But the last thing you can't have is, Kristaps Porzingis shooting the energy out of the basketball sometimes. I have a really good feeling that that's what happened in some of the games that they ended up winning so far earlier this season. I really thought that there was a potential loophole there, or, possibility that is something that could happen. And I think it reared its ugly head here on tonight. 109-97 win for the Toronto Raptors at State Farm Arena. Mine, I say again, and especially there's a little bit more emphasis on it this time. It was for the Emirates Cup. First loss for the Atlanta Hawks. Both teams came in undefeated, so some big stakes in this one for the East Group A standings. We're going to get into a little bit of what happened in the second half, a little bit of the turning point and so forth after these brief messages. This episode of the Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by DoorDash. The NBA season, of course, is heating up, and DoorDash has found the perfect way to keep fans engaged and also in their bag all season long. Whether you're watching the game, just watching for the highlights, or your fantasy team, your favorite player, whatever the case may be, DoorDash makes every game night even better. Of course, the DoorDash is the official on-demand delivery platform of the NBA and celebrating with something called the bag drop. You may ask me, DeShaun, what is the bag drop? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me remind you, every time an NBA player scores 50 points in a game, just for an example, DoorDash drops 50% off your order with Dash Pass the very next day. And you're automatically entered for a chance to win the ultimate fan bag. Super swag, all kinds of really cool stuff. Player inspired drip, all sorts of really awesome things. You want to make sure you're taking advantage of this opportunity. And I love the fact that it's not just food. You can get so many different things. DoorDash is not just food anymore. So many different things. I think it's really, really awesome what they've got going. I'm gonna have to get on top of that myself. So the next time that someone goes off for 50, seems like a lack of defense in the NBA nowadays. Seems like it's going to happen more and more often, more frequently. So you might want to take advantage of this. Just use the promo code NBA50 the next day to get 50% off on DoorDash with Dash Pass plus your shot at the bag drop. Dash Pass members only. 50% off up to $10 the day after a 50-point game with the promo code. Terms do apply. No purchase necessary. Ends on April 13th. Don't forget, seems like you got plenty of time, but time is moving fast. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older only. Visit DoorDashInYourBag.com for details. DoorDash in your bag all season long. This episode of the Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. With the NBA being back, and there's no better place, trust me, to get in on all the action than there is on FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So even if you missed the start of the game, you want to jump in on some live action, of course you can do that. Got live bets taking place, everything from who will score the next, who will score next, or even maybe down to some of your fourth quarter comebacks, buzzer beaters, and so forth. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into same game game parlay for a shot at an even bigger payout. It keeps everything super, super exciting for making that late game push. Help you put a little bit of money in your pockets. We know holidays is coming up. You want to have something to put under that Christmas tree. Don't get caught slipping by the kids. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. This episode of the Locked On Hawks postcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. We all make decisions every single day, but on Prize Picks, being right, of course, can get you paid. What better thing to do than make sure that you're not missing out on any of the excitement on sports this season? It makes no difference what sport it is. It could be the NFL, the NBA, whatever the case may be, college basketball, pro basketball, college football, the whole nine. That's the best part about having all these sports going on all at one time. So if you haven't tried it, of course, Prize Picks is the simplest way to pay. You just pick more or less on at least two players on their stats. And if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds. So make sure that you put in your lineup and just know that this is something that you can play pretty much just about anywhere. California, Texas, Georgia, from the Golden State to the Frozen State, from the Big Apple to the Pineapple. I've used it a couple times and I got some money put right in my pocket, so I know I'm all good. You should probably try it out and do the same thing. Download Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $50 in your lineup after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Appreciate you guys, man, for joining in. Of course, I want to get into some of this stuff too, because I feel like I went off on a total rant about the Atlanta Hawks, in which I feel like I should have. I think that there's a very fine line in the sand that you have to draw between being panicked and pushing the panic button and all those kind of things. Of course, keeping in mind that there's injuries to key contributors, especially your star player in Trae Young, and then also not panicking enough to a degree. And I think that there's a such thing. And I kind of am starting to live more on the panic button side because of everything that is going on. And this team just seemed to be out of sync. Being able to win games that you may not necessarily anticipate, that just seems to be what the MO or the reputation is lately of the Atlanta Hawks, or what I feel like we're going to see this year. But dropping games similar to this one, not only against teams that they should beat, especially coming off the game the other night, got all the energy, the Orlando Magic. It shouldn't have to be a Southeast Division game to get up for it. It shouldn't have to be against a team who most people anticipate being one of the more improved teams in the NBA. And you have all of this physicality, and your approach to the game is much different. You have to do that versus the Chicago Bulls. You have to do that against the Toronto Raptors. Again, not once, but also twice. But you have to make sure that you're able to adjust and make the proper adjustments. And there's going to be nights on tonight where the ball just clearly isn't falling into the basket. The Atlanta Hawks look really good, obviously, in the first half. First quarter was pretty good, but I feel like it was pretty even keeled. However, the concerning part here, I believe, is after a second quarter run by the Atlanta Hawks, went on a 14-1 run to open up the second quarter. Toronto couldn't hit a shot. It was pretty much just not a contrast of styles, but it was more so like a tale of two halves, pretty much, essentially is what it was. Toronto couldn't make a shot. Went down on the stretch where they shot like 1 for 12, and it just really didn't look good. And they came out of the half and looked a lot better. If the numbers didn't say so, 29-24 outscoring the Atlanta Hawks in the third, where there goes the third quarter woes all over again for the Atlanta Hawks, should I say. And it just seems like that's something that they can't shake. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what that is, because that's been going on. That isn't just a new as of, this year thing. That isn't just the last 9 games. That's not just dating back to, last year or the year before that. That's been going on for about a good handful of years or so. I've been covering this team for quite a little while. We're always having conversations about that ugly key, third quarter that things just seem not to go right. I don't know what they're doing in the locker rooms during the half, what's happening, what's not happening, but that just constantly, consistently, and persistently seems to be the Achilles heel for this team, to where they just look completely different in the third quarter. At one point, we thought that their approach, maybe they weren't, approaching the game maybe with the same type of, fire maybe that they should. They get down early, try and come back against teams, or they get up, really early in games. And similar to this one, teams miraculously, for whatever reason, can't miss a shot on purpose, even if they tried. And if not win, certainly put us on the edge of our seats in games that there should never be such conversation had. And I think that that's really where it got tough. And that is really essentially what I believe is our turning point.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
And what comes of that turning point is where I really believe that it was extremely key, where you're looking at the third quarter. Things aren't necessarily going right for the Atlanta Hawks already as is. It feels like that there's a lid on the rim, but you have to be able to get stops in the process, even if shots are not going in for you. They were not stopping ball up top at the half and finding a way to yield for transition points and things of that nature. 11-4 run for Toronto to end the third quarter, one field goal for Atlanta in the final 5 minutes of that third quarter. And it didn't get better because, of course, the Toronto Raptors went on in the fourth quarter to outscore the Atlanta Hawks 36-20. And it's one thing to not have the guys as far as offense. It's another thing to not be able to get the stops. And it seems like the energy from the first half was taken away from them in the second half. And, the defense is about the effort. And that was something that you have to be able to give. It felt like, despite the second half shooting struggles, it felt almost as if they were giving up defensively. And I know that sounds like a really easy thing to say, and maybe for lack of other words, I can't really put it together right now. And maybe they weren't, but it very much felt like that was the case. You have these players that you have drafted. You have these players in which you have put in position to be Atlanta Hawks in the way that you want to build and establish this team to essentially be this defensive team. You go out and get these guys with this long wingspan and all this potential and, these 6'7" wings. And, that's the purpose behind bringing in someone like a Zachary Risashe. And of course, not putting it all on him, but, you have Onyeka Okongwu, who's supposed to be your rim protector. You got the 7'4" guy out there, but he's standing out on the perimeter like a 2 guard a lot of times. And in some cases, even on the defensive side, and that's even when he's in the game or even suiting up to play. So, I think that's where, outside of Dyson Daniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's only one person we have to remember, and he has so many other duties and responsibilities that fall upon his shoulders now, with Trey being out and playing the point guard position, that it's going to be really, really tough to come by for an NBA now, in which it is so easy for your opponents to thrive off of offense, because that's what's promoted for this NBA. So a really tough loss for the Atlanta Hawks on tonight. Got a really interesting one coming up in less than 24 hours again, against the Los Angeles Lakers, which is everybody's favorite game to get up for. Hopefully it doesn't turn into the old State Farm Arena or the Phillips Arena, where, you get more opposing fans coming in and screaming MVP for someone else's team and so forth. So I do definitely want to challenge our Hawks fans to come out, wear your red, be loud, be proud, but certainly our team has to give us a reason to do so. They can't come out against the Los Angeles Lakers and perform the way that they did on tonight, or it won't be a very good look for the Atlanta Hawks. So they've got some work to do. They've got their hands full. They've got some things to change around, especially the coaching staff. Got to make some adjustments, and hopefully the front office is taking some key notes as well to try and make some changes. We can start at that backup point guard position because that's who orchestrates everything. And the traffic director's telling everybody when to come and everybody else when to go. Appreciate everybody for joining us here on tonight. We'll be back with you guys 24 hours from now. Los Angeles Lakers and Atlanta Hawks. Thanks so much for checking us out. Make sure that you go subscribe and make sure that you check out my dude, Brad Rowland, Locked on Hawks podcast coming up next.